What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Dragonknight, which has definitely seen a bit of an increase in its overall DPS as of the Scalebreaker patch. Part of it is due to the fact that single target dots have become a little bit stronger, and part of it is also due to the fact that the Maelstrom set has been reworked a little bit, so it's actually very easy to get the Maelstrom buff, the Cruel Flurry buff, on all of our dots, making us a little bit stronger than where we were standing in elsewhere. At the very least, compared to some other classes here, Stamina DKs probably fall either second to third in line, pretty high up there. Stamina Necromancers still end up beating out the Stamina Dragonknight, mainly because of the fact that they have major vulnerability, but Stamina DKs are definitely one of the strongest stamina specs in the game right now. Combined with their relatively pretty decent sustain, they actually make a very good class for anybody who wants to get started into stamina DPS. The rotation is actually fairly straightforward and relatively simple. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. We will be talking a little bit behind the different sets that I have down in the description below, kind of when you would use them, why I would use them, etc. Then we will discuss the rotation on a 6 million dummy first, and then we will do a full 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the full rotation here. Now I will repeat this when we get to the 21 million dummy parse here, but I am back in my apartment in Wisconsin, and so I'm back on wired internet instead of wireless internet, and so the parse here is going to be a little bit higher than on the other stamina DPS classes. Be on the lookout in the video in the next few days with kind of redone parses. So don't take this parse and compare it to other stamina DPS just yet. So just be on the lookout in the next few days for a video kind of actually comparing all 6 classes together. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with gear. So this gear setup should be pretty familiar with everybody who has kept up with all of the DPS builds so far in Scalebreaker, and the fact that we are doing Maelstrom on our front bar set, Axe Dagger, and then we have 2 5-piece sets here, Relequen and Lokkestiiz. So pretty straightforward, pretty much what you would expect to see in a Scalebreaker stamina DPS here. So really quickly here, we have 5-piece Lokkestiiz here. This comes from Sunspire, so you will have to get access to the Elsewhere expansion to grab this set here. Very powerful set here, but there are a couple of alternatives if you don't have access to Elsewhere or you're not able to get the perfected version of the set. Even the non-perfect version of Lokkestiiz is still very strong though, so don't feel like you have to get the perfect version. Non-perfect version is perfectly fine as well. And of course, our second set is going to be Perfected Relequen, which comes from Veteran Cloud Rest, so you don't have access to Sunspire in order to grab this set here. Now, Relequen is very good for single target DPS, but not so hot for sort of AoE DPS, so of course we will want to swap this out for more trash fights. And again, a lot of sets down in the description below, as that will act as suitable replacements for Relequen here. And then we have the Maelstrom Dagger and the Maelstrom Axe here. Make sure it's the Cruel Flurry set here. Then we have the Master's Bow on the back bar here. So in terms of traits and enchants on everything, as you can expect for armor, it's going to be all divines, all max stamina enchants, and nothing has changed there. And we are still going all 7 medium pieces here. Even if we were to run a monster helm setup here, we would still run all 7 medium. That way we can maximize our overall weapon crit. For jewelry, we are going 3 Bloodthirsty and 3 weapon damage enchants, still the strongest combination there. You can also go with Infused if you would like, but in terms of enchants, weapon damage is the way to go here. There's no need for any other types of enchants here on a DPS. Next, for weapon traits, Nirn on the main hand. It doesn't matter if you have Nirn Axe or Nirn Dagger, as long as it is a Nirn weapon on the main hand here. And your offhand is going to be sharpened. And enchants doesn't really matter because we are using double ravage health poisons, which will suppress our enchants. Then on our back bar we have the Master's Bow, which is infused with the weapon damage enchant. The Master's Bow will give us superior single target DPS compared to the Maelstrom Bow. However, you still want to hold on to a Maelstrom Bow setup, just because the Maelstrom Bow is going to be superior to the Master's Bow when it comes to AoE DPS. So still hold on to your Maelstrom Bows for those trash fights. Regardless of whether you use the Masters or Maelstrom, it should still be infused with a weapon damage enchant. Now, in terms of other sets you might want to consider running, Deadly Strike is going to be probably one of the best options out here that's very easily accessible to everybody here. So this is a Cyrodiil set, so this can be purchased off of Guild Traders. You can get it yourself through Rewards of the Worthy. You can buy it off of, I believe it's in Bruma, where all the medium armor sets are. So you can buy this pretty decent set. It runs very well with the stam decays with all of our dots going on. So it is actually quite strong, and based on the test that I did, replacing Lokkestiiz at least, Deadly Strikes did come. It is definitely weaker, but it's still a very powerful set here. I was able to pull easily 91k or so, 92k with Deadly Strikes here. But there are a few other sets that I do want to kind of touch upon as potential replacements. Starting off with a dungeon sets. First one is going to be Leviathan, which just adds a bunch of weapon crit. In this crit heavy meta, with the Shadow Mundus being so strong, weapon crit is going to be very important here, and because we are running one axe and one dagger rather than two daggers, we do want to make up a little bit of that weapon crit there, and Leviathan does a very good job at that. This is a base game set, comes from Crypt of Hearts, so pretty easy to obtain. The other set I want to mention is going to be Zogvin's Warband. This comes from Frostvault, and the main reason why you would run Zogvin's is mainly for two-handed builds, but there are some instances where Zogvin's dual wield is actually pretty decent. The main thing with Zogvin's is it provides physical penetration on that 4-piece bonus, so that does allow you to use something like Precise on one of your dual wield bars weapons. Or you can do something like Nirn Honed on the main hand and Precise on the offhand if you're running Zogvin's, because that sort of makes up for the loss of one Sharpen trait there. The 5-piece is also pretty decent in the fact that you don't have to worry about minor force uptime anymore. It lasts for 10 seconds, so it's a pretty long period of time, very difficult to actually get Zogvin's to fall off. So really nice. You would still end up using Barbed Trap because Barbed Trap is still a very strong dot, but you don't have to necessarily worry about keeping it up for the minor force anymore. 5-piece also does provide some weapon crit there, so still provides a little bit of additional DPS that way. Moving on to Overland sets, there are a handful of Overland sets that are pretty decent. First one I want to talk about is Spriggan's Thorn. This is going to be more used for trash fights than single target fights because of the physical penetration. You're not necessarily going to be able to get all the debuffs in the game on everything in trash fights. Elkosh maybe on a few, but definitely not all of them unless your tanks are really good with positioning. Crusher, definitely not. Even Major Fracture might not work depending on whether you have a Stamina Warden or a Necromancer being able to provide that AoE Major Fracture. And so Spriggan's Thorn just kind of gives you a little bit of leeway there with that physical penetration bonus. But beyond that, there really aren't many other Overland sets. Briarheart's probably going to be the other big one here that's pretty decent. So when you do critical damage, you have a chance to increase your weapon damage by 449 for 10 seconds. You also get some healing done with every critical strike while that effect is active. So in terms of actual uptime, because it does only happen every 15 seconds, the weapon damage bonus actually ends up being around the same as Hunding's Rage, but because it is a proc set, it carries over to your back bar. Now, with this particular setup with the Maelstrom on the front bar, it doesn't really matter because we have both 5-piece sets active at all times. But if you were to run a Monster Helm setup, then Briarheart would be a decent front bar option because of that, because the effect itself is a proc. And then finally for trial sets, not many other trial sets out there besides Lokkestiiz and Relequen, but I do want to point out Twice Fanged Serpent, basically kind of a slightly better version of Spriggan's Thorn, so very good for trash fights to kind of make up for the penetration on everything. And I also want to talk about Vicious Serpent as well. So this is probably going to be the best base game set for those of you guys who only have access to base game sets here. Mainly because this is the only medium armor set with Minor Slayer, which is a very important buff in PvE content. Now, when compared to Relequen or Lokkestiiz, obviously those sets outpower Vicious Serpent, but Vicious Serpent is definitely a decent set if all you have access to are base game sets here. So this comes from any of the 3 Craglorn trials. It gives you that Minor Slayer as a 3-piece. It adds a total of 3 other armor bonuses, so a little bit more than your typical armor set here. The 5-piece reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 8%, which is not really that great now, with Stamina Sustain being actually very decent in Scalebreaker, so not really that great for the 5-piece, unfortunately. If you do want to run a Monster Helm setup, so what you would do for a Monster Helm setup is you would run one of 3 different Monster Helm sets, and then you would take one of your 5-piece sets here and put it on the front bar here, and you would get rid of your Maelstrom setup here. In the process of doing so, you would need to change up your ability, so instead of Rapid Strikes, you would use some other ability instead, something like maybe Shredded Daggers, or you could keep on using Rapid Strikes if you would like. It's still a pretty decent DPS move, and it fits very well with the kind of dot setup that you have here. but it's not going to be as important to keep Deadly Strike on there if you decide to go with the Monster Helm setup. The 3 Monster Helm sets that you're going to want to use if you decide to go that route are going to be Celine's, which is a base game set here. Very decent, single target only, however, doesn't really have any sort of cleave behind it. Then you have a Velodreth, which comes from Cradle of Shadows, so this does require you to have access to DLC. Very good set here. The weapon damage is a very powerful bonus here, and you also get a little bit of additional cleave damage as well through the 3 disease spores that spawn. And then the strongest option would be Marsalok, which comes from the new dungeon lair of Marsalok. Very, very powerful, especially if you get a lot of negative effects in a very organized raid group with tanks and healers all debuffing the enemy there. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are going to be one of the best options when it comes to races for stamina DPS. The absolute mathematically best option is going to be the Orcs, which get the 2000 stamina, well, a little bit of max health, and 258 weapon damage. Dark Elves get the 258 weapon damage and 1875 max stamina, but they also get some max magicka, 1875 max magicka, and 258 spell damage. So if you want to flip-flop between stamina DPS or magic DPS, Dark Elves are definitely the way to go. You have a couple of other potential racial options, what I like to call the quote sustain races, so that would be the Red Guards, the Imperials, and the Wood Elves. All 3 of them get 2000 max stamina, so you're not necessarily losing too much on the DPS, but you are losing out 258 weapon damage on all 3 races. In return, all 3 of these races get some additional sustain bonuses. So Wood Elves get 258 stamina regen, Red Guards get 990 stamina back whenever they deal damage every couple of seconds, Imperials get 3% cost reduction on everything, plus 333 resources across the board whenever they deal damage. So your overall DPS ceiling is going to end up being lower with those 3 races, just because you're not getting that additional weapon damage. And then there is the Khajiits, which kind of fit into this sort of jack-of-all-trades sort of race here. So if you're not sure if you want to commit to being a stamina DPS, maybe you want to be a tank later on down the line, or maybe you want to be magic DPS, you can run a Khajiits. So Khajiits get pretty balanced stats across the board. They get 825 max magicka health and stamina, 85 magic regen, stamina regen, and 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So overall, very balanced stats across the board, but they're not necessarily going to excel in any of the three roles, at least compared to optimized races for those roles. So kind of good as a jack of all trades, master of none race. In terms of attribute points, all of our points are going into stamina. You are able to sustain a full light attack rotation running blue food, with stamina sustain being as high as it is. So there's really no need to put any points into health, because with blue food, your max health should shoot up to very easily 17k without Ebon, without toughness, so you should be good to go there. For Shadow, for the Mundus, we are still running the Shadow. Nothing has changed with Munduses or anything, so we're still sticking with that. And then for the purposes of the Parse, we are using Parse food, so that's max stamina and stamina regen. This will give you us kind of a good idea of kind of the sustain you can expect to get if you have basically all sustain tools there. So you already get charged from the 21 million W Parse, but other synergies to get some additional resources from there. You have Hersines already provided to you, but you might also have some other sources of stamina regen, such as the Massive Restoration Staff or Sentinel Rukugam. So this kind of replicates a kind of best case scenario, kind of best support for stamina DPS here. It also provides kind of consistent buffs across the board, so that way we can compare all the classes equally. Moving on to our skill bars here. Starting off with our front bar, we have Rending Slashes, Rapid Strikes, Noxious Breath, Venomous Claw, Molten Whip, Flawless Dawnbreaker. Then on our back bar, we have Soul Trap, Poison Injection, Arrow Barrage, Flames of Oblivion, Barbed Trap, and Standard of Might. You can pick which morph of Soul Trap you want. Consuming is going to deal more single target damage, and Soul Splitting will deal more AoE damage. They're both pretty decent at the jobs that they are designed to do, single target and AoE, so just basically pick whichever one is most important. You might need to ask your raid lead whether they prioritize the AoE damage or the single target damage instead. Cleave damage is still very high, even though they did nerf a bunch of kind of AoE dots, so Soul Splitting Trap might not necessarily be as useful as just straight up consuming Soul Trap. You can also replace Molten Whip on the front bar here with Barbed Trap again if you would like. If you prefer to have it on the front bar here, you can basically double bar your trap there. The DPS difference is going to be very, very small. In general, you'll have higher max weapon damage with Molten Whip active, but your average is only going to be very small in terms of how much it increases it over Barbed Trap. So pick whichever one you'd like here. And then, of course, if you don't want to run Molten Whip, you can replace this with Vigor if you need some sort of self-heal. For champion points, the CP cap is 810, which gives us 270 CPs across each of our different constellation colors. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 100 Moon Cap and 75 in Tenacity. The only thing that's really important here is going to be 100 into Moon Cap for the stamina regen. Tenacity, it kind of depends. If you need the heavy attack to sustain a rotation, then put a couple more points into Tenacity, 75 like I have here. But if not, if you're able to sustain just perfectly fine without heavy attacks, you can drop points out of Tenacity and put them into other nodes depending on what you need. I have 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord, for example, with 75 into Tenacity. For blue CPs, we're assuming that we have all the debuffs in the game active, so that would be things like Alkosh, Infused Torx Crusher, Major and Minor Fracture. That's why we have 61 points into Piercing. If you're running something like Zogman's with extra penetration, you're running double Sharpen rather than Nirn Honed and Sharpen, then you will want to shift points out of Piercing and put them into other nodes here. So you have 64 Mighty, 61 Piercing, 56 Precise Strike, 66 Thaumaturge, and 23 into Mastered Arms. As you can imagine, Stam DKs don't have a lot of direct damage, so we don't really need to invest that much into Mastered Arms. We can dump it all into Thaumaturge, Mighty, and Piercing and Precise Strikes here. Finally, our red CPs. This is going to be more of a one-size-fits-most approach, so you're going to get very good mitigation across pretty much all pieces of content with this setup here, but you're not really maximizing for any single piece of content. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that's pretty much everything you need to know in terms of the build, so now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So we're going to move the dummy back here, and we'll talk about the rotation on our 6-wheel dummy friend over here first. So the general rule of thumb here is going to be start your front bar rotation with the rapid strikes. That way you get that 4-second Cruel Flurry buff active. That'll get you Rending Slashes, Noxious Breath, and Venomous Claws. And then end with rapid strikes. So your front bar rotation is pretty much always going to be the same. It's always going to be rapid strikes, Rending Slashes, Noxious Breath, Venomous Claws, rapid strikes once or twice depending on how much time is left on your back bar dots. And that's going to vary depending on whether you use Trap or Flames of Oblivion the previous cycle there. So that's really the core behind the front bar rotations. Just make sure you start and make sure you end with that with the rapid strikes, so that way you get the Cruel Flurry buff on all 3 of your dots on the front bar. And then when you end with the rapid strikes, you get the Cruel Flurry buff that will buff, at the very least, Soul Trap and usually just one other single target dot, whether that's Poison Injection or Barbed Trap. Generally speaking, that should be pretty much all you need to do. The back bar is going to be basically rotates around here. So you're going to have a little bit of off time on your dots just because of how long you're staying on your front bar here, but it's important to get all of that front bar off because you do want to get that Cruel Flurry buff active on your back bar here. So the back bar is pretty much really simple. You're just kind of rotating. So the first time you're on your back bar, so we'll just kind of start things off here so you guys get an idea of what it looks like. See here, I have time for 2. So again, we start with the rapid strikes, that way we get all this off, and you can see here that we will have some downtime on our dots. And then you basically rotate between using Trap and Flames of Oblivion here. So you will have a little bit of downtime on Flames of Oblivion. So you can see here that once we go back to our back bar, our Trap's about to run out, so then we do Trap, Soul Trap, and so on and so forth. So that's a general idea here. You're basically going to be switching back and forth between using Rearmor Trap and Flames of Oblivion. Now, your ultimate has a little bit of an animation associated with it. So generally speaking, I like to just finish off all of my back bar active abilities first, use my ultimate, and then bar swap cancel out of that animation. And you'll see that happen when we do the 200 million dummy parse here. Alright, so that is pretty much all the rotation. I think it'll be a lot clearer once you see a longer parse on a 12 million dummy parse here. This will give you an idea of the amount of DPS you can expect to see on a stamina DK. Now do take note that this DPS is going to be a little bit inflated just because we do have 100% major force uptime, which is impossible in an actual raid environment. So a little bit inflated there, but this does give us a good kind of comparison across the other classes here. Now, I will reiterate that when I made the other DPS videos, I was in a was using basically wireless internet, so my connection to the PTS server was not great. I had lag issues. Now, when I am back on wired internet, the connection issues kind of have gone away, as you can expect. And so this is not necessarily going to be an accurate representation of the DPS compared to other classes. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I do plan on doing a video actually taking a look at each of the different parses and sussing out all the differences there. So be on the lookout for that in the next few days here. But without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and get started here with our parse. Oops, I used the wrong ability, so I will reset the dummy real fast. Now, because we are running Lokkestiiz on both bars, doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter which bar you use your synergies on. So just use them as soon as you see them pop up. So just remember that Rapid Strikes is a channel, so if you ever need to use like a potion, you will have to wait for the Rapid Strikes channel to completely end before you're able to use a potion. Synergies are kind of hit or miss if you try to use them while Rapid Strike is still channeling. You can certainly try, but it's usually easier just to let the channel completely finish before trying to hit that synergy button. So we'll drop our standard when we do our next back rotation. Whoops. We ended up double casting our arrow barrage, so but you did see that I did decide to go through all of my backbar dots, including poison injection, before I use my ultimate, and that's just so I can bar swap cancel out of the relatively long summoning animation for the standard. Once we get into execute range, which would be defined here as 25%, don't really have to change anything here. Again, I just dropped all of my backbar dots before I drop my standard, just so I can animation cancel out of it. Shoot, I forgot to drop a trap. Okay. Rotation is messed up a little bit there because I forgot to drop my trap. There we go, that is the full rotation. A little bit lower than what I've pulled in the past, but I don't think I have any parses saved up from the past. No, I don't. Not any that are recent, at least. So here is the parse here with a 21.3k. I have been able to pull upwards of 94.4k or so. This was a relatively bad parse on my part. Just a couple of hiccups here and there. I was also having trouble weaving out of Soul Trap. I'm not sure if that is a PTS issue or my issue. I don't remember, but I think there was something about one of the Soul Traps being a little bit weird to light weave on a above bar. But you can see here that a lot of dots. Pretty much all of this is complete dots. The only sort of direct damage that you're going to be seeing here are basically going to be your light attacks and the initial hits of everything. So that would be things like Flames of Oblivion, so the initial hit of Noxious Breath, initial hit Poison Injection, initial hits of Rending Slashes. So very, very few non-dots here. Pretty much everything else is essentially dots. Venomous Claw is going to be one of your strongest dots here in terms of both ticks as well as overall damage contributed. And then Flames of Oblivion is a pretty strong in terms of burst damage, but you don't really get that many Flames of Oblivion procs off just because it only hits 4 times in the course of 15 seconds, so not a lot here. But that's pretty much it for this build video. Again, be on the lookout for a complete 6-class comparison across the DPS spectrum in the coming days here. If you guys have any questions or comments about this build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.